of Jesus who said, "Behold, I am coming soon." Dear friends, of all the parables that Jesus told, the one that is sandwiched in the middle of today's gospel is one of the easiest as parables go in terms of being able to understand it. It goes like this. When at the beginning of May you see the little green leaves starting to sprout on the trees, you know that a Wisconsin summer is right around the corner. Even if you had no idea where we were in the calendar year for some reason, even if you had been in a coma for months and you woke up, if you went out and you looked on that day and you saw those little leaves, you would know spring is in the air, summer will follow on its heels. And so also, the things that fill the 6 o'clock news, hurricanes and earthquakes and fires, roaring seas and surging waves, terror attacks and mass shootings, threats to security that make nations feel perplexity and anguish. So also when you see all these things, you know that Jesus is coming. He's right around the corner. He's coming soon. Like those little green leaves, you and I can see those things happening around us, and even though we don't know where on God's calendar we are living, we know that Jesus is coming, and it won't be long. We have the signs before our eyes, but have we paid attention to them? In the verses around the parable of the fig tree, Jesus sketched a couple different reactions that people have, a couple different approaches to life in these last days as we wait for Jesus to return. There are those, Jesus said, who are worried, who are fearful and frightened, who see the things going on around them and whose hearts are terrified. And then there are those, Jesus says, who have escaped from worry by numbing themselves to the realities of life, numbing themselves with excessive drinking, carousing and drunkenness, Jesus said. Finally, there are those who see the signs and who stand up, excited, because they know that each and every one of those signs is a reminder of God's promise, and a reminder that He will keep His promise, and that Jesus is coming and coming soon. Which one of the three describes you? Well, we all know the right answer. We all know that we're supposed to be excited, that we should live every day watching and waiting for Jesus to return. But if you're anything like me, it seems that that is a steep task to carry out and to live. We have the signs all around us, but they don't register as signs. We get distracted along the way. Sometimes we get distracted by those little leaves that are sprouting. And instead of reading them as the reminder that Jesus is coming, we get really interested in the leaves themselves. Maybe even we stop along the way to pick a few to take a closer look. And what I mean by that, of course, is that when we forget that Jesus is coming and coming soon, our attention turns to the wrong things. When we forget that Jesus' return is imminent, then our hearts, instead of being excited, go elsewhere. For finally, there is only one ultimate, right? One ultimate thing that will satisfy you and me, that will fulfill all of our deepest desires and longings. And that one thing is to be with Jesus. The day of His return brings that perfect satisfaction about. But as we go along our way and Jesus doesn't return, we forget about that. we start looking for ultimates elsewhere. In the things that fill our lives right now. We take some of those leaves, if you will, and we try to brew a tea out of them that will be strong enough to satisfy us. Right? Have you ever met someone who's always been after the next big thing? Who's never been satisfied? Whose life is a constant drive to get the next goal accomplished, checked off the list? If you have, you've met someone who Jesus describes with these words, someone whose heart has been weighed down. Has that person ever been you? And as you go about life and you check off your goals, one thing after another checked off the bucket list, each time that you accomplish one of them, you arrive only to discover that it didn't deliver the lasting satisfaction that you hoped it would. And if that's been you, if you have learned by sorry experience that there is nothing in this world of ours that can satisfy you fully and fulfill your deepest desires and longings, what did you do? There's a reason that Jesus describes those whose hearts are weighed down as those whose hearts are weighed down with excessive drinking, with carousing and drunkenness, because that's a normal human reaction. When somebody wakes up and realizes that their deepest desires don't have fulfillment in the things of this life, no matter how many different things they chase after, no matter how many different places they turn. That pain screams out. The pain of futility in life in this world screams out for something to take the edge off. Drugs or alcohol promise to do the trick. A few drinks and very quickly that long face turns to laughs and jokes and having a grand old time. My friends, if that is you, if you are drinking to excess, if you are toying around with prescription drugs or with illegal drugs, if you're trying to take the pain of an empty life away, then be warned. You are in a very dangerous situation. Jesus warns you that those whose hearts are numbed will be surprised on the day of his coming. It will catch them off guard. It will close on them like a trap. There won't be time for splaining when Jesus returns. And what could be more horrible than if on the day of his return he were to find you out of your right mind, drugged up, drunk, because that's all that you could think to do with your puny little view of life. But then again, maybe you're not the drinking type. Maybe you're far too serious to go and get drunk. You know, there are other ways to numb your mind to the sadness and emptiness of life without Jesus, apart from keeping his return in view, aren't there? Perhaps the one that's most dangerous for all of us is simply to fill our minds with so many distractions that we forget not only about the pains of this life, but of course we also forget that Jesus is coming back. I wonder if Jesus were preaching to us today, if he wouldn't say something like this: when the Son of Man returns, will anybody even bother to look up from their screen to see what's taking place? When the heavenly bodies are shaken, the sun and moon and stars falling from the sky, will you stand up and look for Jesus, or will you be trying to capture a really great selfie with that in the background? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that technology is evil. But I think it's worthwhile to consider this. All our devices and our entertainment, could it be a drug of sorts? Something to numb our minds so that we don't have to think about the hard, painful realities of life? Could it be that distractions are something we use so that we don't have to spend any idle time reflecting on what really matters, so that we can cruise through this life pretty much numbed to everything that's going on around us? And let me add this too. All of our technology and devices, do they point us to Jesus' return? Or do they just add to the worries that we have? How many times did you check your phone yesterday for the latest notification to show up? And compare that to how many times you cast an eye to the skies to see if Jesus was returning. Or turn to his word to remind yourself of his promises. And I think you know what I mean. My friends, if that describes you, if you don't like to sit and think, if you need a steady stream of new things to distract you, if you're anxiously worried because he didn't text me back, or what did she mean by her comment on my post, then at least do yourselves this favor. Take a look at that content that fills your screen and tell me if the horrible and tragic things that make for good clickbait on the web aren't the very signs that Jesus pointed to. Signs that are, for you and me, supposed to be reminders that Jesus is coming back. That our lives and our hearts are not fixed on some nether world that exists within a screen and within a screen only. Our hearts and eyes are fixed on Jesus and on him who is coming and coming soon. If I had to guess, I would say that most of us spend a good deal of time in this life numbed, forgetful of the end, forgetful of God's promise, not remembering that Jesus is going to return. I would guess that those moments when we aren't numbed, we find ourselves terribly worried and frightened. When we think seriously about this life, about how important everything is, about how much purpose and meaning God has invested into it, about what's taking place in these days, which Jesus has promised will not be easy days for anybody, but days of trial, the days leading up to his return as the judge of all. When we see that, how can we help but be worried? There are so many things to worry about. Your health, your wealth, your children, your family, where you're going to take the next vacation, what needs to get done at the office or at home. Things going on in this nation, things going on in this world. My friends, if that is you, if the things that fill the 6 o'clock news run as terrifying what-if scenarios through your mind, then take Jesus' words to heart today and hear in them a word directed to you that goes like this: you have forgotten, with all your worries, that there is more to your life than just the winter that you are living in right now, that the eternal summer is coming, that Jesus is right around the corner and coming soon to take you there. And all the things that you worried about will be shown to be nothing but pointless worrying. on that day of his great and awesome return. You and I know that we are supposed to be excited for the day of Jesus' return. We have minds, though, that are numbed to that reality, and hearts that so often are filled with worry and anxiety and fear. Which is why it's so important that we are here today to listen to Jesus tell his simple, easy to understand parable so that we might take its point to heart and see the little leaves that are sprouting all around us for what they are. Signs that Jesus is going to return. And if the generation to whom Jesus spoke had all of these signs before their eyes, none of them are missing before the eyes of this generation of ours either, are they? Some of them were given names this year. Harvey and Irma. Earthquakes and fires, terror attacks and mass shootings. Signs. Reminders for us that Jesus is coming and coming soon. And so that we might have courage to stand fearless when everything around us crumbles, so that we might be brave to lift up our heads and look for Jesus to return when it seems like we should only be frightened, anxious, or sad. Jesus, in our gospel today, gives us one of the most profound, comforting, and inspiring promises of all. For he promises that while heaven and earth, and together with it all of the things that we worry about, that frighten us, that seem to lack purpose or meaning, all of them will pass away. But, Jesus says, my words will never pass away. There is only one ultimate, only one thing that will satisfy you and me perfectly, one thing to fulfill our deepest desires and longings, and that one thing is to be with Jesus and to have his promise that we will, and to have his assurance that despite the fact that everything in this world around us might topple and fall down, his promise will never fail us. What more do we need than that? To find a place where we can take our stand in these last days and lift up our heads and look for Jesus to come, and even pray for him to come quickly. For we know that he is. He will come. And with him comes our redemption. Amen. Please stand. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding,